What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Hoops and Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Isaac, and today we're going to be talking about the recent trades and signs and free agency for the NBA. So it should definitely be a pretty interesting and definitely a great episode. So definitely one to watch all the way through. To start off, we had a trade between the Warriors, the Wizards, and the Suns where we've seen Bradley Beal go to the Phoenix Suns, and then we've seen Chris Paul and some picks go to Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, and some picks go to the Wizards. And then we also seen the Wizards got Jordan Poole and some picks, and then ended up trading away Chris Paul for the Jordan Poole and picks. So the Warriors ended up with Chris Paul. The Wizards ended up with Jordan Poole, Landry Shamet, and some picks. And the Phoenix Suns ended up with Bradley Beal, obviously. And for this Phoenix Suns team, they've had a super team, I'd say, since they got KD, because at first they had KD, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and DeAndre Ayton, who is okay. And then now they'll have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and DeAndre Ayton still. So you're just flip-flopping Bradley Beal and Chris Paul. And for the Wizards, this is going to put them into even more of a rebuilding state than they already were in. I mean, obviously you have a young Jordan Poole who's going to develop and get better. You have Landry Shamet, who isn't really that great of a player, but he can come off your bench, put up some decent numbers for you maybe. And for the Warriors, you're getting Chris Paul, who definitely doesn't fit your system. And as a Warriors fan, I really don't like this trade just because I liked Jordan Poole a lot, but they needed to just get rid of the cap space that Jordan Poole was taking up. So it is an understandable trade, I guess. But we'll only have Chris Paul for this year, and then his contract is up. So unless he extends his contract with us, then we're going to be losing him next year. And he's also going to be retiring within the next couple of years. And Jordan Poole was a young player that was going to develop. They could have tried to maybe trade away Klay Thompson, but they probably wouldn't want to do that just because of how much he's done for the franchise. He's one of the best players in the Golden State Warriors franchise, and I mean, obviously he's been there since he was drafted, and him and Steph Curry are the Splash Brothers, one of the most iconic duos. So Jordan Poole is probably the only one that really made sense to trade away, but I really didn't like this trade for the Warriors, and I think that the Phoenix Suns probably won this trade. Our next trade was with the Celtics, Wizards, and Grizzlies, where we seen Kristaps Porzingis land in Boston, and we've seen the Wizards get Tyus Jones and picks from Memphis, and then Memphis ended up with Marcus Smart. So again, the Wizards are involved in this trade, trading away their second best player, probably second best. I mean, obviously Bradley Beal was the best player on the Wizards, so then you'll put it between Kyle Kuzma and Kristaps Porzingis, and I'd say Kristaps was probably a little better than Kyle Kuzma. So they're trading away another one of their good players, and with Kristaps Porzingis, you're going to get a big man that can shoot, and he can play some defense for you. And last year he was one of the best big men in the league, or one of the better big men in the league. So for this Boston Celtics team, I think this was a really good trade, even though Marcus Smart did a lot for the nearly championship team that they put together, that played against the Warriors in the finals. And obviously, like, a lot of Celtics fans are upset about it, but Marcus Smart is getting older, So he's not going to be as good as he's been in the last couple of years in the next couple of years. I mean, Marcus Smart is still a great player, but I definitely think that Kristaps Porzingis is going to help your team out more because he's basically just I'd say the taller, less defensive player as as Marcus Smart, because Marcus Smart is just a short. He's short. He can shoot a little bit, and that's exactly what Kristaps gives you. He can shoot, but he's just tall, and I mean he can play a little defense. Maybe not as good as Marcus Smart, but he can still play some defense for you. So I'd say it's a pretty good trade for the Celtics. And then for the Grizzlies, giving up Tyus Jones and some picks for Marcus Smart is definitely good for them. I'd say they won the trade. But for the Wizards, they lost. They basically lost Porzingis for picks and Tyus Jones. I mean, Tyus Jones isn't a terrible player. And, I mean, obviously he was the Grizzlies. He was going to be the Grizzlies starting point guard for their first 25 games. But now the Grizzlies are going to have Marcus Smart starting for 25 games. And then once Ja comes back, I don't know what they'll end up doing. Maybe they'll run Marcus Smart off the bench. I'm not sure. But for the Wizards to get a player who was technically a backup point guard from the Grizzlies to replace their second best player, I mean, obviously you have some picks with it, but still I don't think it was a very good trade for this Wizards team. And I think that they could have definitely done better. But overall, I think that the biggest winner of this trade was probably the Boston Celtics. One more trade that I want to talk about at the moment is a trade between the Utah Jazz and the Atlanta Hawks, where we're seeing the Utah Jazz get John Collins, and the Atlanta Hawks got Rudy Gay and a future second round pick. So for this Hawks team, I think this is a terrible trade. I mean, obviously, John Collins hasn't been producing like they thought he was gonna, or like he was the year before this past season. But John Collins still has a lot of time to become a better player than he already is. And I feel like they just moved on from him too quick. And to basically trade him for a player who is going to retire within the next couple of years and second round picks, which aren't very valuable, it doesn't make much sense to me. But for this Utah Jazz team, they're getting a really solid player, I feel like. Big finisher at the rim. We've seen him posterize Joel Embiid and Jarrett Allen, two of the tallest centers, or, well, not tallest centers, but Joel's 7 foot, and John Collins just postered him like it was nothing. So you're getting a pretty solid finisher out of John Collins, and I really like that for this rebuilding Utah Jazz team. So I'd say for this trade, the Utah Jazz 100% won it. We've seen veteran guard Victor Oladipo exercise his $2.4 million player option to remain with Miami Heat for the 2023-2024 season. And Oladipo is a solid player. I mean, obviously we've seen him get his injury last year. But I do really like Oladipo. He could definitely be a good player off their bench. Definitely not a starter, but in his prime, he was a really good player. And, I mean, for Oladipo to, come off the bench, I mean, that shows that your team has really good depth, I'd say. And it just shows, I mean, I'd say, it shows the skills of your GM and how good, it shows that your GM can get stuff done. Your GM can provide your team with depth, which is really good to have. And with trading and signing players, it's not just about your team that you have now. It's about your GM, because your GM has to be the one that can get that stuff done, and that's what matters the most, I feel like. But with Victor Oladipo, we do see him get traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder for draft picks. And Victor Oladipo was already on the Thunder before, so he will be a returning player to this Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm pretty sure he was on the Thunder before he was on it. Like, he was on another team. I think he was on the Pacers between it or something. But I mean, like I said, Victor Oladipo is a solid player, but I'm pretty sure that in his during his prime era, yeah, he was on OKC for 1 year. That's what I thought. So he was on Orlando for 3 years, and then we see him go to the Oklahoma City Thunder, where, I mean, he averaged 16 points with OKC last time he played for them, 2016, 2017. He played 67 games, and he started all 67 of those games. So Victor Oladipo was a solid player, and last year he still averaged 11 points. So, I mean, he's still a solid player. He can definitely come off your bench and put up some solid numbers for you. So he's definitely not a bad asset to have on that Oklahoma City Thunder team. We also seen James Harden pick up his $35.6 million option with the 76ers, and at the time that he picked up the option, the two sides, meaning James Harden and the 76ers, were beginning to work together on some trade options, and some possible spots for him to go were the Clippers and the Knicks. But now, after a couple of days, the 76ers are saying that they might want to keep Harden, who, I mean, obviously it has gotten a lot older than he was 10 years ago, and is not anywhere near as good as he was when he was, say, with the Rockets. But he's still a solid player, and still, he can be a player who helps develop other players. Like, if you have young players, like, for example, like the 76ers have Tyrese Maxey. For right now, they have Tyrese Maxey. So James Harden is a player that could help Tyrese Maxey develop, and he can he can give him tips and help him work on his skills for the future. We also seen the Kings bring back veteran forward Harrison Barnes on a $54 million contract extension for 3 years, who, I mean, like I said, is a veteran, so he's going to be helping develop Keegan Murray, who is a young forward, and I don't think that this is a bad option at all for this Kings team, who did also acquire Chris Duarte in a trade for some picks. So, I mean, $54 million for 3 years is obviously quite a bit of money. It's going to be around the $17 million per year mark. So for a older player like Harrison Barnes, I do feel like that is a little bit too much, I'd say. But I mean, if that's gonna help Keegan Murray develop, I think if that's what you gotta do, then that's what you gotta do. We've seen the Warriors and Draymond Green agree on a 4-year, $100 million contract with a player option in the final season to re-sign with the Golden State Warriors. So, obviously, for the Warriors, this is a great move, considering that Draymond Green has been their vet power forward for the last couple of years, and he's been with the team since he was drafted by them. So, I mean, for this Warriors team to bring back Draymond, I mean, it's $25 million a year, but it's 100% worth it. He already knows the team well because they're just re-signing him, obviously. So this definitely will keep the Warriors a playoff team, and as long as they all stay healthy. And bringing back Draymond is just going to keep your defense solid, which, I mean, everybody says defense wins championships. So, I mean, if you have Draymond, maybe you could win a championship with his defense. So hopefully we can see the Warriors make a couple more moves to make their team just right to try to win another championship. We also seen the Wizards re-sign their forward Kyle Kuzma to a 4-year, $102 million deal. And re-signing Kyle Kuzma is going to, I mean, they're still going to be in that rebuilding state, but Kyle Kuzma is definitely going to help them as, like, he's going to make their team better so that they're not the worst team, but they're definitely not going to be the best team. I mean, obviously Jordan Poole is going to be their best player, like, altogether, but Kyle Kuzma will also contribute a lot, and he's definitely going to be their second best player this year. We've seen Coby White agree on a 3-year, $40 million deal to stay with the Chicago Bulls, and I feel like they overpaid him just because I feel like they don't use him as much as they should. But this year they probably will end up using him quite a bit just because they're going to be missing Lonzo Ball for most likely the whole year. So they do need somebody to replace him, and Coby White could be that person. I mean, obviously we've seen Coby White struggle with injuries in the past, but hopefully he can stay healthy and he can put up some solid numbers for the Bulls after he just got a $40 million contract for 3 years. And we also seen the Bulls bring in former Bucks guard Javon Carter, which is going to be another guard for 3 years, $20 million. And he's going to be another guard that can come off your bench. And obviously Coby White was their backup point guard at one time before they lost Lonzo Ball for the whole season. So this is just going to be replacing that bench position because they're probably going to end up bringing Coby White up to the starting rotation. But the Bulls, obviously, like I said, Lonzo's going to be hurt. He's going to be out for most of the year, if not all of the year. So they put in for a disabled player order, which like, from the looks of it, is just to make it so that they don't have to pay out of their salary cap for Alonzo just because they're not going to be able to use him the whole year. So it should be a pretty interesting year for the Bulls, I'd say. We've seen the former Denver Nuggets forward Bruce Brown agree to a 2-year, $45 million contract with the Indiana Pacers. And after just coming off of a championship, that's going to make you even more valuable because you have that experience as, like, what it's going to take to get you to the finals. So I feel like this is a really good pickup for Indiana, and I think that they'll definitely be a really solid team this year. And with Tyrese Halliburton still developing, I think that he'll be a great player for them this year. I mean, even better than he already was last year. And I think that they'll end up trading Miles Turner away soon. So we could definitely see some big moves from the Indiana Pacers following their Bruce Brown signing. Jerami Grant agreed to a 5-year, $160 million contract with the Portland Trail Blazers. So he will be returning to the Trailblazers this year. And for the Trailblazers, he's a phenomenal player. And he's going to provide you with some shooting. And, I mean, he's a pretty big guy, probably 6'7", maybe 6'8". So you're going to be getting a really good player out of Jerami Grant. Obviously they've had him for a year or two now. So I definitely do like that the Pacers are going to be bringing back Jerami Grant for that Pacers team. But for the NBA altogether, I really like to see players move. So it's really upsetting that some of these players are just like re-signing with their old teams. but for the team, it is a really good pickup, and I do really like Jeremy Grant. He's a phenomenal player. We've seen Kyrie Irving agree to a 3-year, $126 million contract with the Dallas Mavericks, and there were talks about him going to the Lakers, but the Lakers don't have enough money, I'd say, to sign Kyrie Irving, and I think that was all just a rumor. And I mean, there was also talks about him going to the Suns, but I have no clue how the Suns have even anywhere near enough salary cap to have even Bradley Beal with Kevin Durant. Like, I don't know how they have enough money to sign 4 players like Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, Bradley Beal, and Kevin Durant. Imagine they had Kyrie Irving instead of Bradley Beal. That's even more money that they would be putting into their salary cap, and I definitely don't see that working out for them in the long run. And we've already seen Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving team up, so it just wouldn't make much sense for the Suns. So I mean, obviously the only logical landing spot for Kyrie was Dallas. We've seen Jakob Poeltl agree on a 4-year, $80 million contract to stay with the Toronto Raptors. And Poeltl is a very underrated player, and he's definitely going to be a solid center for this Raptors team where he was traded to last year. So, I mean, for $20 million a year, you're getting a solid player out of Jakob Poeltl. We've seen Chris Middleton agree on a new 3-year, $102 million deal with a player option to stay with the Milwaukee Bucks. And obviously he could have easily just walked away from this Bucks team, but I feel like Chris Middleton is a pretty loyal player to his team. And I mean, even though they were first round exits, he still came back, and that just shows how much he really likes this team. And I mean, you have Giannis Antetokounmpo on your team. How could you not want to return to that team? I mean, they're all gonna come back, and they're gonna work even harder than they did last year, just because of that first round exit. I'm sure that made them furious. So I think that they're gonna be working 10 times harder to try to get to that championship spot again. Like, once again, I mean, they won their championship, so they already have experience of making it to the finals and winning the finals. So for Chris Middleton to resign, like I said, that shows how much he really wants to get another title with this team. We've seen forward Cameron Johnson agree to a 4-year, $108 million deal with the Brooklyn Nets to come back. And Johnson was traded to the Nets during the Kevin Durant trade, when Kevin Durant was traded to the Phoenix Suns from the Nets last season. So I mean, Cameron Johnson's a pretty big dude, so he can run the power forward or the small forward. I think they usually run him at the small forward, and then they have Dorian Finney-Smith at the power forward. So they'll have like a 6'8" small forward if they keep running Cameron Johnson at that small forward position. And that's what I really like about this Nets team, is how tall they are. And I feel like Cameron Johnson really fits their style of play. So I do really like that the Brooklyn Nets brought back Cameron Johnson, and I do think that this is a really good re-signing for them, and it's definitely worth their money. We see Trey Jones agree to a 2-year, $20 million deal with the San Antonio Spurs, and to bring him back as a young guard to build around Victor Wembanyama. That's just going to be great to start off Wembanyama's career. He's going to have other young players that he can develop with and grow with to become an even better player than they already are. And I do really like this for the Spurs, because Trey Jones is a solid player, and he'll definitely be helping Wembanyama he's going to be definitely helping him get used to the NBA life in the league, because obviously Trey Jones is also a very young player, So that'll also help out Wembanyama, who was a young player, obviously, since they just drafted him. We've seen a former Miami Heat guard, Gabe Vincent, agree to a 3-year, $33 million deal with the Lakers. And I mean, after the Heat lost Tyler Hero, I feel like Gabe Vincent as a guard really stepped up and helped the team out a ton. So for the Lakers, I feel like this is going to be a really good player to possibly come off of their bench. And maybe if they have a player in their starting rotation get hurt, then Gabe Vincent will be able to step up for this Lakers team. And I mean, for only $11 million a year, I mean, I know that does seem like a lot, but you also have players out here making $45 million a year. So in the NBA world, that's not really as much money as it seems like. So for Gabe Vincent to have that small of a contract for his skill level is really good. We also seen forward Herbert Jones agree to a new 4-year, $54 million deal to stay with the New Orleans Pelicans. And I do really like Herbert Jones, so I do really like this pick for the Pelicans. And I mean, obviously with Zion being out, they can play Herbert Jones over him. But Zion is supposed to be returning this season. Who knows, though, because, I mean, constantly he's getting injured. So we might see Herbert Jones stay in the starting lineup. We never know. We see the Lakers bring back Rui Hachimura on a 3-year, $51 million deal. And I mean, at the end of the season last year, Rui Hachimura was putting up some really solid numbers. And I do think that Rui Hachimura could definitely be a really solid player for this Lakers team. And since he's been drafted, he wasn't really doing much for the Wizards. I mean, he was putting up okay numbers, but I feel like he really just started getting actually good, like at the end of this past season for this Lakers team, and I mean into the playoffs he was doing pretty good. The Raptors lost their guard Fred VanVleet to the Houston Rockets, who signed him on a 3-year, $130 million deal. And I mean, for Fred VanVleet to be undrafted to have and then go to a 3-year, $130 million deal is absolutely insane. I mean, that's so much money. That's like what, $45 million a year. So I mean, he's going to be making quite a bit of money. So he should definitely step up for this Houston Rockets team. I mean, they already have a pretty young team. They have a couple of good young guards. They have Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green. So, I mean, they don't really need Fred VanVleet, but, I mean, he's a good player, and he's definitely somebody that you want on your team. We also seen the Lakers sign Cam Reddish for 2 years. And, I mean, Cam Reddish hasn't really done much coming into his career so far, but he's still also pretty young. So he could definitely change that, and he could become a pretty solid player for this Lakers team. The Lakers also agreed on a 4-year max extension with guard Austin Reeves. And, I mean, obviously we've seen Austin Reeves perform well last year. And I do really like this for the Lakers because, I mean, Austin Reeves is still a young player. He's still going to get better, hopefully. And he's going to provide you with... He's a great shooter, so he's going to provide you with some three-point shooting. And they also re-signed to guard D'Angelo Russell to a 2-year, $37 million deal. And, I mean, D'Angelo Russell is a really inconsistent player, I feel like. So for them to pay nearly $20 million a year for someone as inconsistent as D'Angelo Russell is, I feel like that's not a very smart idea. Obviously we've seen him start off with the Lakers earlier in his career, and then he ended up with the Warriors, and then the Warriors and the Nets and the Timberwolves, and then this past season he was just traded back to the Lakers. So Definitely a lot of moving around for Russell Westbrook, and definitely a lot of experience for Russell Westbrook, but he's still a pretty inconsistent player. We've seen the Toronto Raptors agree with former Los Angeles Lakers guard Dennis Schroeder on a 2-year, $26 million deal. And this is an attempt to replace Fred VanVleet, but obviously Dennis Schroeder is nowhere near the same amount of talent as Fred VanVleet is. But he is going to offer you a potentially starting guard to, like I said, to attempt to replace Fred VanVleet. Just definitely not as good as Fred VanVleet, and definitely not comparable. But I mean, other than that, Dennis Schroeder's not a terrible player, but he's just like, he's not an all-star caliber player like Fred VanVleet is. We see former Brooklyn net guard Seth Curry go back to the Dallas Mavericks on a 2-year deal. So that's going to offer the Mavericks obviously a backup guard who can shoot the ball pretty well, and pretty small guard, like 6'2". He's probably around 6'2". So I mean, you're getting a pretty solid bench player out of Seth Curry for the next 2 years. We also seen Derrick Rose signed for 2 years with the Memphis Grizzlies, which I do really like, just because he can really be a leader in the locker room for the Grizzlies team, but he can also be kind of a role model towards Ja Morant, because Derrick Rose, when he was younger, in his MVP season, he was exactly like Ja. He, like, with his skill on the court, and I feel like he could really help Ja get through the problems that he's dealing with right now. And I just think that it was a really smart idea for the Memphis Grizzlies to go after Derrick Rose in the way that they did. We've seen a very talented player, Tyrese Halliburton, agree on a 5-year maximum contract extension with the Indiana Pacers. It's worth up to $260 million. And I mean, I really like Tyrese Halliburton, and I think that he is going to be a great player in the future. And I think he should be able to make it to quite a few more All-Star games. And I mean, he's already been to one. So I think that he'll definitely be a good option for this Pacers team. And I really like the potential that Tyrese Halliburton has to be a phenomenal player. Desmond Bane and the Memphis Grizzlies agreed on a 5-year, $207 million maximum contract extension. With Ja Morant being out, you're going to be missing your best player. So your second best player that has to step up is Jaren Jackson, but he's a big. So I'd say your biggest scorer, your next best scorer, is going to be Desmond Bane for this Memphis Grizzlies team. And while Ja Morant is out, I think that Desmond Bane is really going to have to step up on the offensive end, and he's going to have to carry the load. And I do believe that a young Desmond Bane can do that for this Grizzlies team. Max Strus agreed to sign a 4-year, $63 million deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And again, this is another player who was on the Heat last year. And I mean, for Max Strus last year, I feel like he's another player along with Gabe Vincent, who, once Tyler Hero was injured, he really stepped up for that Miami Heat team, and I feel like he helped them really helped them get to the finals. Like, he contributed a lot to that finals team. I mean, obviously they didn't win it, but he had a really good role in them getting to the finals. The Lakers signed free agent center Jackson Hayes
on a 2-year contract. And I do really like this for the Lakers, but I feel like their success this season depends on Anthony Davis's health status, because I feel like if Anthony Davis can stay healthy, then this Lakers team could make it to the finals possibly. I mean, you have to get through the Suns, and who knows how good the Suns are going to be with, I mean, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. But if the Lakers can all stay healthy, LeBron, AD, I feel like this team could be a really solid team. We've seen Damian Lillard request a trade from the Portland Trailblazers after they got Scoot Henderson from the draft with the third overall pick. I mean, they just like Damian Lillard probably feels pretty disrespected by that, especially since Damian Lillard is like the Blazers franchise player. So obviously we see him request a trade, and he really wants to go to the Miami Heat, but the Clippers and 76ers are also an option, or were an option, but it seems like he really does want to stick with going to the Miami Heat. And I mean, if the Miami Heat can land him, that would be amazing for them to go with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. But the Miami Heat want to get rid of Tyler Hero, and the Portland Trailblazers don't want Tyler Hero for Damian Lillard. So I don't know if the trade will end up going through or not. But I really hope that we can see this trade happen, because I do really want to see Damian Lillard and Jimmy Butler team up and possibly even win a championship, because I do really like Damian Lillard, and obviously Jimmy Butler is a phenomenal player. He did really good in the playoffs last year. People were comparing him to Michael Jordan. So I mean, Jimmy Butler is a really solid player, and I really like Jimmy Butler too. So I would really like to see those two players team up, and then to add on, you have Bam Adebayo. So it's just it would be a great trio in my opinion. The Philadelphia 76ers signed guard Patrick Beverley to a 1-year deal, and I feel like a lot of people are overlooking this signing, but I feel like Patrick Beverley is he can be a really good hype man. He can be a really good locker room leader, and he can definitely play great defense. So I feel like this is a really underrated signing throughout all of free agency and for the Philadelphia 76ers, just because Patrick Beverley is a really underrated player, and I really like Patrick Beverley. The Milwaukee Bucks re-signed their veteran center Brook Lopez to a 2-year, $48 million contract, and the Rockets were the biggest contender to the Milwaukee Bucks in signing Brook Lopez, but obviously we see him go back to Milwaukee, which is a really good option, just because, I mean, like I said earlier, they have Giannis Antetokounmpo. Who doesn't want to play with a player that is as dominant as Giannis Antetokounmpo? Like, it's insane how good he is, and if you don't want to play with him, then you're insane. Obi Toppin was sent to the Pacers via trade in exchange for 2 future second-round picks, and I do really like that for the Pacers, because I feel like Obi Toppin is going to be a good player in the future. Maybe not great, but I feel like he could be a solid role player in the future, and I feel like he's a very underrated player. And with his age, he's still young, so he's still going to have time to develop and all that good stuff. LaMelo Ball agreed to a 5-year rookie max extension that could be worth as much as $260 million, which is great for LaMelo Ball, who really has been injured for a lot of his career. And I mean, when he plays, he's a really solid player for that Hornets team in Charlotte. But I am pretty positive. Let me just look real quick. Sorry. Anthony Edwards also agreed to a 5-year rookie maximum deal that could be worth as much as $260 million. So Anthony Edwards and LaMelo Ball both signed the same exact contract. We seen center Dwight Powell agreed to a 3-year, $12 million contract to return to the Dallas Mavericks. So for 4 years on Dwight Powell, that's not too bad. He's a decent player, but they do also have like players like Christian Wood and Rashawn Holmes. So I mean, if they didn't end up bringing Powell back, then I don't think it would have been that big of a problem. But I mean, he's a decent player. You could probably run with the power forward if you wanted to. So I mean, it's good, but it's not like if like he's not going to change if they're a championship team or not, in my opinion. Like he doesn't have that much of an effect on a team. So I don't think it really would have made a difference whether they got him or not. The Houston Rockets signed Dillon Brooks to a 4-year, $80 million contract. And obviously there was talks of him going overseas because he's not a very good player at all. And I honestly don't know why the Houston Rockets even signed him. Dillon Brooks is not that great. And, I mean, they got Fred VanVleet. And, I mean, Dillon Brooks, maybe if you signed him for, like, $20 million for 4 years, then maybe, I mean, that would only be $5 million a year. But you're signing him for $20 million a year for 4 years. That's just ridiculous, especially for Dillon Brooks. That's just way too much for a player like him, who probably nobody else was probably going to sign him. I mean, like I said, like if his contract was smaller, then maybe it would make sense. But $80 million is kind of ridiculous for Dillon Brooks, a player who people thought were going to go overseas. Russell Westbrook re-signed with the Clippers on a 2-year deal worth nearly $8 million. So, I mean, he was making $40 million a couple years ago. Now he's making $4 million a year. So it's definitely a big change for Russ and his contract. Definitely a big contract differential, I'd say. For it to go from $40 million to $4 million. But, I mean, that's what happens when players get older and they start to regress. You're going to get smaller contracts, and that's what happens. Like, a player can go from a $20 million player to a $2 million player. Like, it's crazy how much, like, a contract can change just in free agency. The Clippers traded 2 future second-round picks for Kenyon Martin Jr. from the Rockets. And I do really like this for the Clippers because Kenyon Martin is still a young player, and I do really like him. I think he has some pretty good potential. And, I mean, the Clippers also have Bones Highland and Terrence Mann. So, I mean, they got a couple of young players that I think have pretty good potential that I really like. So, I mean, like, they have, like, Paul George or Kawhi Leonard that run small forwards, so you have Kenyon Martin that can replace either one of those two once they end up, like, retiring or whatever, because they're obviously coming towards the end of their careers. Kawhi deals with a lot of injuries. I mean, Paul George does too, so you got a pretty solid option to replace either one of them. Former Warriors guard Dante DiVincenzo agreed to a 4-year, $50 million contract with the New York Knicks. And I mean, DiVincenzo was a solid three-point shooter for the Warriors off the bench this past season. So, I mean, I think he does deserve a pretty solid contract like this. And I mean, that's about like $12-ish million a year. So, I mean, he's making a pretty solid contract. He's definitely gonna be a solid role player for the Knicks. I'm sure he'll come off the bench. So, because they'll have Jalen Brunson and Emmanuel Quickley at their point guards. So, I mean, they don't really need Dante DiVincenzo, but he's a good player to have. I do really like DiVincenzo, and I think that he will be a good role player, but he's never going to be more than a role player, I don't feel like. I mean, he was behind Steph Curry, so, I mean, he had He had experience with with the greatest shooter of all time. So I do really like this pickup for the Knicks. It can definitely provide them with some 3-point shooting. We've seen restricted free agent Miles Bridges sign a 1-year, $7.9 million qualifying offer with the Charlotte Hornets, which is going to make him an unrestricted free agent next year. And I mean, obviously, he dealt with his off the court problems, and before he was about he had those off the court problems, the day after that, he was about to get, it was either 20 or 25 million dollars a year, and on a 4 or 5 year contract. So he was about to get $100 million over the next 4 or 5 years, and he just went and ruined that because, I mean, he just did something stupid like that, and that changed how much he was making by $12 to $17 million a year. So that's like the problem. Like, you have to think before you do stuff, because that's the type of effect it has on you. Like, he just lost so much money over what he did. So, like, you got to think before you do stuff, especially when you're an NBA player like that, because it can really affect your life. And with Miles Bridges, I mean, he lost over $10 million, like, for this, at least for this year, and that's so crazy. Eric Gordon signed a 2-year, $6 million deal with the Phoenix Suns, and I mean, the Phoenix Suns team is already stacked, but Eric Gordon is just going to be a great locker room leader and a good hype man in the locker room. I mean, obviously he's older, so he is a vet, and I do really like this pickup for the Suns. Just because of that reason, he's gonna be able to hype your players up. He's going to be able to provide you with some like extra support, and even if you don't give him minutes, he's still gonna be able to lead your team mentally to a win. We did see the Orlando Magic waive center Bol Bol. And I mean, obviously, Bol Bol is a fan favorite, but I feel like if he was actually given minutes, he could prove himself and show that he is a solid role player. I mean, he's definitely not a terrible player. He has length, and I feel like he is just never given a chance, just because, like, people think of him as a meme player. So I mean, Bol Bol, he should definitely get another contract somewhere else. I would be surprised if he doesn't. But, I mean, like, as a Warriors fan, I would like to see Bol Bol come to the Warriors, just because we are a team that lacks centers. Like, technically, we don't have any players that are listed as centers besides maybe Kevon Looney, but the rest of our players, at least last season, were all power forwards. But I would definitely like to see Bol Bol go to a new team. I mean, obviously, even if it isn't the Warriors, I would still like to see him go to a new team, just because Bol Bol is he does have potential to be a solid role player for a team, and that's especially why I like Bol Bol, because after his injury that he had in college, people just doubted him, and he's never really gotten a chance to prove himself. So I feel like he should definitely get another chance on a different team. We see Grant Williams from the Celtics sign a 4-year, $53 million contract and a sign and trade agreement with the Dallas Mavericks. So Grant Williams is going to end up in Dallas after a sign and trade with Boston and San Antonio. Boston got 2 future second round picks, and San Antonio got guard Reggie Bullock and swap rights in 2030 from Dallas. So I mean, it's a pretty good trade for Dallas. I do really like Grant Williams. He's going to be a solid role player for this Mavericks team, with Luka, Kyrie, and Christian Wood. So I mean, I do really like this sign and trade for the Dallas Mavericks. I don't think it's going to turn them into a championship team, but it's definitely going to make them a little better, I'd say. Mo Bamba was given a 1-year contract with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I mean, obviously, he's going to be behind Joel Embiid. But if he does get minutes, he will be their backup center. I think the 76ers really like their younger center, Paul Reed, though. Just because, I mean, obviously, he's a lot younger than Mo Bamba. But I do really think that if Mo Bamba gets a chance, then he could prove that he could be a solid player off your bench. If you need him to start, he could start, but I feel like he's just not given a good enough chance on any team that he's played for. We've seen the Portland Trailblazers match restricted free agent Matisse Thybulle's 3-year, $33 million offer sheet from the Dallas Mavericks. And I mean, the Dallas Mavericks just got Grant Williams, so they don't really need Matisse Thybulle just because Matisse Thybulle is a forward, Grant Williams is a forward, so they don't really need Matisse Thybulle. So I think that's okay for the Dallas Mavericks, but Portland Trailblazers are bringing back Matisse Thybulle, so that's a pretty good deal for them, I'd say, just because Matisse has a really good defensive side of the ball. Not much of an offensive player, but he is definitely a great defensive player. We've seen the Sacramento Kings acquire Indiana Pacers guard Chris Duarte for 2 second-round picks, and one pick being a 2028 second-round pick from Dallas, and another being the Kings 2030 second-round pick. So for the Sacramento Kings, I do really like this trade. Chris Duarte can come off the bench for you and play some solid minutes, I'd say. I do really like Chris Duarte. He did pretty good. I think it was this past season. So, I mean, for a young player, he's not bad to get him for 2 second-round picks just because he does still have potential to be a great player. And he was looking pretty good when he was in Indiana. And I think that he might be a solid role player for this Kings team, or maybe a solid bench player. That's going to be it for today's episode. If you guys enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next Sunday on the Hoops and Stuff podcast.